Foreign Minister, welcome to the Raisina Ideas Pod. In this time around, what are your first impressions of India?
Oh, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here in this country where so much is taking place. Well, this is my second time at the Raisina Dialogue and also my second time as a foreign minister in India in one year's time. I spent a few days before I came back here to Delhi in Bangalore. We have 280 Swedish companies active in India. 35% of them are in Bangalore dealing with high-tech and IT solutions. And I have to say that I think that coming to Bangalore was like looking through a spyglass into what the future of India will really be like. This is a superpower in ascendance, and that should be acknowledged by the world. And Sweden, as a small export-dependent nation, is very proud to have its long commitment with India, with many of those companies which are here having been here for quite some time. Ericsson, for an example, a world-leading telecommunications company, have been here for more than 100 years. That's quite impressive. When we arrive at the country, we usually stay on for a long time, we Swedes.
We know that. And Sweden, with just 10 million people, seems to be punching well above its weight in India, and very impressive investment credentials and very impressive investment plans. How do you see this evolving? And do you see Sweden also getting the collective force of the Nordic countries, which are collaborating in multiple ways, and along with the Baltics? What impression would that have on India in terms of investments?
Well, on a purely bilateral basis, as I just said, the commitment that we have is very strong. One sector I really would like to highlight in particular is space. Already in 1986, Sweden signed the first MOU with India, and we have had an ongoing cooperation. But as they say, the sky is the limit, particularly when it comes to ballistic techniques. And I think that we can do much more. In Bangalore, I also visited the Indian Space Research Organization. That was also an eye-opener to how far advanced India is in this regard. So I see a lot of cooperation. Sweden considers itself to be a leading space nation, and we are one of only 2 countries in the European Union with the capability of launching satellites from our own territory. Looking again towards where we can find more room for commitment and for cooperation, I think that questions regarding telecommunications, regarding health, regarding everything to do with IT technology and AI are areas where we have a keen interest. And then moving to the Nordic and the Baltic scenery, well, we are one of the world's most integrated regions. We, the Nordic and the Baltic countries, the so-called NB8's, which is the 8 countries. And we have a concept which I think is unrivaled in the world. If you look at our combined economies, we would qualify not only for G20, of where India is a member, but actually to G10. That is the degree of how integrated and how strong we are when we speak with a voice. And we would like to reach out to India as an ally. This is why we are here. I have come here with ministers and representatives of all the NB8 countries for dialogues, also with your foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, who we will meet later on today when we are doing this interview.
Excellent. One of the areas where India is very keen is a technology-led green transition, because in India's ambition to become a developed country in the next 20, 25 years and to go on to higher levels of growth, the technology-led green transition is very important. And I know that India and Sweden are coordinating on the LeadIT, taking that forward. So talk us through some of that. How important is that area? Where is Sweden there? And how do you see these collaborations evolving?
Yeah, thank you. This is actually an area which we also should talk more about. We are ready to take the cooperation to the next level, as they say. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the LeadIT, the so-called leadership group for industry transition. That was formed at the COP28, and where India and Sweden now have a co-chairmanship. And this aims, exactly as you were saying, towards making decarbonisation of heavy industry come true at a more rapid speed and more thorough. And there is, I think, an obvious benefit and an obvious imperative in this, because it has to do with combating climate change. And that is something which concerns us all highly in the planet, on the planet and in the world today. But it is also, and here I think we, Sweden, can add something to the table. It is also about advancing the question of sustainability and sustainability of the economy into the future, where we know that the future will be green and sustainable in itself, but it doesn't arrive at that point without you having to put some work into it. And we're ready to do that together with India as champions of this vision that LeadIT represents.
Yes, and one important part of this is the green steel transition. India is looking at pathways to get onto a green steel, both in its private sector and public sector production of steel. So I believe Sweden is very well advanced in that area. So what is the promise of technology there? How is Sweden looking at green steel?
Yes, we have a steel factory, the Swedish steel company, SSAB, that has its activities in the north of Sweden, very close to the iron ore mines of in Kiruna, which is one of the world's greatest deposits of iron ore. And if you look at what we have achieved in later years when it comes to green steel, it is actually quite remarkable. We have been able to reduce the emissions. We have been able to produce high quality steel with lower costs. And what we are aiming at right now is to combine the question of energy production with the question of green steel, because if you want to if you want to have steel manufacturing, you have to understand that cheap energy is the key. So we are also ready to talk more about this with India, because we are now looking through our energy sector, and we are thinking about an energy mix. We have no lack of hydropower in a country like Sweden, but the question of nuclear energy is now coming more and more into the question, especially the SMR, the small modular reactors. And this is also an area where I think that India and Sweden could benefit more from cooperation.
Right. And what about green hydrogen? In India, there's a lot of conversation about green hydrogen and perhaps some other new fuels we might go invent along the way. So is the conversation in Sweden about hydel and nuclear, but also about green hydrogen or some newer technologies?
Certainly. We're going to need all of those if we are to combat climate change, and if we are to arrive at that future where we all want to be, where we are not dependent on fossil fuel to the extent where we are now. So you're quite right. Hydrogen is also an area where Swedish industries are active, and we're also constantly trying to hook up with other partners, and India is certainly an ally also in this regard.
Right. So coming now to your region and the dramatic changes taking place in our world in flux, particularly there, how do you see the global landscape now changing, and particularly in your near neighborhood with the war in Ukraine, now that you've decided to abandon 200 years of what they call neutrality? So where are you with the NATO entry? What exactly is the position, and how does Sweden look at the world now?
Well, these are indeed very challenging questions for all of us, because Russia's aggression at Ukraine has upturned the old order, the old world order as we knew it. War is back in Europe, which it hasn't been for 80 years, at a scale unprecedented and with massive casualties. In all this, Sweden believes, of course, that we should all stand at the side of Ukraine, those of us who believe in the rules-based world order, which Russia is challenging by its policies and by its war. You're quite right. We are now leaving the concept of being a non-military aligned country, and together with Finland, we are joining NATO. Now, that is not a decision which we are taking lightly. After all, we are talking about a period of 200 years where we have been non-military aligned. But it is necessary because Russia has shown what it's capable of. It's capable of taking massive risks and also moving into its countries with the ambition of recreating the Russian Empire. And this was very clear to me because in December 21 prior to the invasion. The foreign minister Sergei Lavrov sent a letter to the world where he outlined the strategic foreign policy goals of Russia, one of them being that Sweden and Finland would never be allowed to join NATO. And that was an infringement on the sovereignty which we all, those of us who believe in a rules-based world order, where we all believe that you have to take a stand. And this, I think, was what prompted really, together with the actual invasion, us to make a shift in our policy. Now, Russia has imperial ambitions. That needs to be said. They want to incorporate areas which do not belong to them as the Russian Federation. And they are doing so also in a manner which is challenging this rules-based world order that we put up after the Second World War, where all countries on the planet said that enough was enough. Violence cannot be, a prop to achieve, an increase in power. And coming back then to the area where we're sitting now, India, which is a country situated in the Indo-Pacific, we see another power, namely China, but also is a risk in this regard, with its military assertiveness in the Taiwan Strait, with its language and its moves in the South China Sea. I suspect that this is also something which makes the arrival here of a Nordic-Baltic group perhaps even more interested, because we want to be partners with those in the global society who believe that we have to stand jointly together to push back these attempts of reinstating an old imperial colonial order, which we didn't believe in prior to 1945, and we believe even less now. And India as a country has a history which I think makes it a natural ally to the Nordic-Baltic countries in this regard.
So coming back to the war in your region, now troublingly entering the second year, or it's going to be 2 years, we are hearing a lot about fatigue in Europe, fatigue in the US in terms of more pushing weapons and so on, and a possible end game or a peace plan. So with Sweden and Finland now being part of NATO, will you weigh in for peace plans to resolve this conflict, or would you like to continue confronting Russia to make it change its behavior?
Well, first of all, we know from history that Russia will only change its behavior once it's military defeated. So on that, there is no doubt that a military defeat in the battlefield has to be the answer to it. There is a peace plan on the table, however. That has already been presented by Ukraine's President Zelensky, and it is thus far the only credible peace plan that is at the table. And Sweden supports this together with other countries. We stand side by side with Ukraine because we realize that if Russia wins in Ukraine, it's not going to stop there. Next on the list is probably Moldova, Georgia, and maybe also countries like Poland or the Baltic states, who also, in Russia's view, belong to their lost empire. So we have to confront this. The support for continuing to support Ukraine militarily in Sweden stands at 90%. 90%. The highest that we have in the European Union. And I have to say, because I attend the meetings of foreign ministers in Brussels, in the European Union frequently, there is no fatigue. This is very much a media hype, where there is a swing mode sometimes in media. You build up and then you try to tear down. We have to look at this from a more practical, a more, how should we say, conscious point of view. And there I say that the re-establishment of Ukraine's sovereignty, its territorial sovereignty, is the only way forward. If we want to acknowledge the UN Charter and what it says about using violence towards other countries. After all, we are talking about a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations attacking another member of the General Assembly, another member state of the UN. Of course, we are watching what is going on in the US. I can only reiterate what has been said many times before, that the US Congress should decide on the military package to Ukraine, and that is important. The EU has to ramp up also its support towards Ukraine, and that needs to be done, it has to be done, and it will be done. But I don't see any way forward apart from Russia being defeated, no.
Okay, so given these very strong positions, Do you feel there is a role for other powers, non-European, non-Western powers, for instance, India, Turkey, others, to play a role here in resolving this issue?
I do. First of all, we have to look at the questions of Russia trying to circumvent the sanctions that has been put in place, and this is, of course, important for all of us. That the sanctions regime is being upheld, and that no support is given to Russia. At the end of the day, when President Zelensky's peace plan is to be launched. It has been launched, but when it's put into place, and when Russia is ready to negotiate on those terms, I certainly see a role for India and for Turkey. I also would like to add, however, that there is a link between China and Russia, and that shouldn't be neglected. If Russia wins in Ukraine, that is a trumpet blast to other countries who might think along the same lines. And it would be highly unfortunate if such a situation came about, but China sees an opportunity for its aggrandizement in this part of the world, for utilizing an imperial mentality also in the Indo-Pacific. So the war between Russia and Ukraine, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, is important also for this part of the world and for India as a nation. And that is also a message which I have as a Swedish foreign minister to all who are listening to this broadcast.
Thank you. So on that optimistic note, thank you very much. And thank you for your perspectives. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to be in India.
Thank you.
Thank you.